Hey everyone, it's Jen B, and welcome to my studio. Settle in for a nice long video where I take you start to finish on creating a bezel set pendant with this beautiful labradorite. Let's get to work. Alright, so the first thing that you're going to see me doing is taking a pair of dividers and checking the height of the stone or the height of the girdle of the stone so I know exactly how tall to make my bezel. So I'm grabbing my bezel wire and I'm going to compare it to the dividers, and amazingly, it's the exact same size. I love when that happens. I am clipping the end of the bezel and then using a file to get a perfect, or as near perfect as I can, 90-degree angle to the wire. This will help create a nice strong solder join when I solder the bezel together. I did put just a little dot on that end of the bezel because that reminds me that that is the side of the bezel that I have already cut and filed. And I am just working at shaping it to the bezel. I created a little bend with my pliers and then decided I needed to move the bend a little bit further up on the bezel so that the join of the bezel is more on the straight edge of the stone, which will be a more strong and secure solder join. So I'm just cutting off the excess wire, forming it around the stone to get a perfect fit, and then using a Sharpie marker to draw the line. I do just want to say I apologize for all the dog fur on my black cardigan. It happens when you have dogs. Alright, so I'm just cutting right where that mark is, or a little outside that mark, and then I am filing that side to have a nice 90-degree angle, and double checking the fit here to make sure I've got it cut right where I want it. I do. And then working at getting those ends to sit on the same plane with each other so that they are nice and flat and flush and will make a perfect and strong solder joint. Okay, it looks good. So we will head right on over to the soldering area. I have got the bezel set up on my soldering board with a chip of solder underneath the seam. I'm using my torch to heat the metal and spraying it with flux. I'm going to zoom in here and give you a really nice close look at the seam and the solder, and it's going to flow right there, right up into the seam. And you can see here in this clip that I've got a really nice joint. The solder is all the way through the seam and it looks great. Over at the bench, I am preparing the silver sheet by just drawing some lines. The client that I was making this pendant for had requested a pretty thick silver border all the way around the stone, and so I'm making sure that I have enough space to create that border. And then I'm cutting out the back plate and cleaning it up with a sanding sponge. If metal is dirty with oil or oxidation, solder can't flow very well, if at all, and so cleaning the metal is very important. I am shaping the bezel to the stone by pressing it up against some pliers, double checking to make sure that it fits nice, doing some final refinements on the shape. and it's looking real good. And here in a moment, I'm going to show you right here that the bezel fits perfect over the stone. And now I am checking that the bezel sits flat on the back plate. It does not, and so I'm looking around my studio for my sandpaper. There it is, my sandpaper clipboard. This is how I used to flatten out bezels, or to get a nice flat flush side on the bezel. But I have since moved over to using my jewel tool, which is a lot easier on my hands. And you can see me doing that here. I've got the bezel on some nano tape, is what it's called, on I think this was a game card from an arcade. And I am just flattening out or sanding the bottom of the bezel so that it sits completely flat on the back plate. And now back over at the soldering station, I am preparing the back plate with flux on both sides so that it is protected from fire stain and fire scale. More worried about fire stain than fire scale, and there's a long explanation I could get into, but fire stain is like a stain underneath the metal that is very hard to get rid of. So I've got the back plate all fluxed up and placing the bezel right where I want it so that I have enough space all the way around for the silver border. Getting the bezel sprayed with flux. And then here momentarily I will start to add the solder chips to the inside of the bezel. My hand does get in the way a little bit here just because of where I have the camera set up, so I apologize about that, but I am adding little tiny pieces of solder all the way around the bezel. And I am sad watching this video back because that was my old flux bowl that I had painted with my son and then recently knocked it off of my soldering station and it shattered. And I'm very, very upset about it, but a good excuse to take him back to the pottery gallery and paint another one with me. Alright, so I am now heating everything up. I'm going to take my flame and go over the top of the metal and then also go underneath. And you can see here that the solder is starting to melt and flow. That dark line all the way around the outside of the bezel is the solder. I'm just checking to make sure that it did flow all the way around. And back over at my bench, the metal has been in the pickle, so it's nice and clean, and I'm just giving you a look here at how beautiful that solder seam looks. It flowed all the way around the bezel on the back plate and created a beautiful solder joint. So now I'm going to work on creating the outline for the silver border. Normally I would take like a Sharpie marker and draw the border, just the thickness of the Sharpie marker, but because it was requested that this border be a little bit thicker, I'm using a technique from the sewing world where you're taking a ruler and putting little dots all the way around the, well in this case around the bezel, and then I will go and use my Sharpie marker, which you can't really see what I'm doing here because my hand is in the way, but I am just connecting the dots. I believe I put the dots at 5 millimeters away from the bezel, and then I just connect the dots, and then that is the line that I'm going to follow as I saw out the border. So here I am just working on getting that sawed out. So I'm just going around, making sure to stay on the outside of that line. And then I go over to my new favorite tool, the jewel tool, to refine the shape and smooth out all of those saw lines that I created. I love the jewel tool because you can see through it, see what you're doing as you are sanding and grinding. And here's a look at it. It looks pretty good right there. Over at the bench, I'm just doing some very final shaping with my file. I really didn't have to do a lot of work with my file because most of it was done on the jewel tool. It is looking really, really good, if I can say so. Here I'm just showing you that I had purchased these Bezel templates from an Etsy shop. I'll have the link down in the description. And I just printed them on some sticker paper and then put the sticker onto a piece of metal, and I am cutting out the Bezel. After I burn the sticker off, I'm refining the shape a little bit. And unfortunately, I did not get a clip of me shaping the bezel, but I did just use a small mandrel, or you could use bail making pliers to shape the bezel around that. But once I've got it shaped, I take it over to the soldering area, and I am soldering the tip closed. So I'm picking up a tiny piece of solder with my pick and then dropping it on the point of the bezel, making sure it flowed all the way around, checking that it did flow. Yep, it looks great. And back over at the bench, doing some final shaping and refining of the bail. Then I'm going to add a jump ring to the bail, and the jump ring is what is going to be soldered to the back of the pendant here in just a moment, making sure the jump ring is closed. And then I'm using a center finding tool to find the center of the top and the bottom of the pendant, because that's where I'm going to attach the bail and my cartouche. Here at the soldering station, I am working on getting solder on the back of my cartouche so that I can sweat solder it to the back plate. So I'm adding some solder chips, and then I'll use my flame to get that solder to flow. I've got a pick handy, and as soon as that solder is liquidy and flowing, I will use my pick and the flame to help spread it all around the back plate. This will help ensure that the cartouche is soldered all the way around. I'm setting up the pendant and the bail with the jump ring on the top of the pendant, and then adding the cartouche to the bottom of the pendant.
Intermittent fasting. You really kind of have to work up to it.
Putting a piece of solder on my soldering board. Get the flame lit, and then we'll start heating up the metal and spraying it with flux. Once everything is fluxed up, I'm going to take that little ball of solder and dip it in some flux and then add it right into the inside of that jump ring. And we'll get everything up to the temperature needed so that the solder can flow. And sorry, I tried to zoom in with my camera a little bit here so that you could really get a good look of that solder right there flowing. And then back over at the bench, cleaning up any excess solder on the outside of the bezel. And just doing a little bit of cleaning and scratch removal with a scratch eraser, which is one of my favorite tools for my flex shaft. And now on the jewel tool, I have a scratch eraser. And here I'm using the jewel tool and a big radial disc brush to do the final finishing and polishing. So just going through and making sure that everything is getting a nice polish. Really cannot say enough good things about having the jewel tool in my studio. And here's a look at the pendant before I put it in the tumbler. I decided to tumble the pendant with steel shot. This client wanted a really nice high polish to the finished pendant, and steel shot helps get a nice high polish finish. So I'm setting the labradorite here. You can see I've got some protection down on my bench pin just so that as I'm moving the pendant around, I'm not scratching the back plate. So I'm just setting the bezel, checking that it looks great. And then here is the beautiful finished pendant with a nice thick border of silver all the way around it. I am super happy with how this turned out. Thank you all so much for joining me for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.